Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
All right, here we go, Josh.
Okay, it's Brutalist time. It's been a while. So the movie's about a architect from Budapest, Hungary, who was sent to a concentration camp and separated from his wife and his niece. And he goes to the United States, and his wife comes later with his niece. And during that time, he finds a patron that is able to give him money for a single project, and that's the scope of this movie. And it's his process through that project, and then his reintegration of him and his wife in the United States. I think I've got a lot to say about this movie. I have a lot to say. I don't know where to start, so why don't you start?
I want to make a little bit of a joke. The Brutalist is brutal. It's brutal.
Yeah.
It's a hard movie to watch. I had no idea what I was going into. I did not expect anything that I got. I'm not sure what I got. I'm not sure I understand this movie. I'm glad we're talking about it. And the only way I can describe it is exactly how I feel about his architectural work. It's large, it's dark, it's brutish, it's ominous, it's emotionally void of anything if you look at it a certain way, but it invokes an emotion. But I was not emotionally invested, nor did I emotionally connect with this movie. That's how I feel about this movie.
So I saw it twice. I saw it once on opening night, and then I rewatched it on Sunday.
Wow.
A couple days ago. So, and I'm glad I did, because I missed a lot visually. I think that I usually key in on a lot of visual things in a film because that's how I usually interact with movies. We've talked about in the past where I'm more about like what's on screen and what's coming at me orally too, whether it's score or, something like that, or the patter of someone's dialogue, something like that, as opposed to the dialogue itself. And there were a few lines that I totally missed and a few scenes that I completely excised from my memory after the first viewing, that after the second viewing, I'm like, well, this is probably the most important scene in the movie. So the movie is long. That's going to be the first thing people say about it. It's 3 hours and 13 minutes or something like that, 3 hours and 34 minutes, I guess. But then you've got an intermission in there in the middle, which I loved both times that I watched this movie. It was so nice to be able to just chill out for a second, go to the bathroom, have enough time to order another beer or something and be ready for the next part of the movie. Whereas in a lot of movies now, even if it's a 2 hour and 45 minute long movie, you just don't get that. And I did enjoy that. So how much of this movie for you was gimmick versus like sincere? 'Cause I'm ready to flick the switch of cynicism at any moment, and I was expecting this to be Brady Corbet, who last time we talked about his last movie Vox Lux, we kept saying Brady Corbet, but I guess it's always been Brady Corbet. But Brady Corbet kind of being like, I'm gonna make an epic, and similar to how Orson Welles said, I'm gonna make an amazing film with his first film, and he made Citizen Kane, and it was an amazing film. I am not putting this movie on the same level as that, but I think that he really swung for the fences, and it never took me out of it, his ambition in this film. And he put a lot of stumbling blocks in his way, whether it was shooting on VistaVision cameras, which hadn't been used for years and years and years, or whether it was coming up with his own funding for the film, all of those things. He's, having to start, then stop, then start and stop again. It's supposed to be made in 2020, then the pandemic, and they stopped down. They had totally different lead actors back then than they do in this instance of the film. So there's a lot going on, and I was ready and waiting to just like discount it and say like, yeah, this guy's just too full of himself. But it actually did. It was a lot, and I felt like it landed for me. So I got a lot out of this movie. The score's amazing. It is beautiful visually. And I thought there were great performances in it. So, when did you see this? Like recently, like yesterday or?
No, last week.
Okay. So have you thought about it at all since then?
Yes, but first let me say this. I should have continued when I was speaking about what I didn't fulfill what I wanted to say in the beginning. I said what I said kind of jokingly. What I do need to say is ... That doesn't mean this film doesn't have value for me. That doesn't mean that the film didn't affect me on some level. It doesn't mean that I don't understand that it's a great movie, if that's what people want to call it. It's just, we've talked about this a gazillion times. I need that little art history lesson. I need that little, hey, what is the piece of the puzzle that as an artist, you placed it there, but all I can see is the whole puzzle. I can't see the piece. And if I knew where that piece was, maybe I would understand the whole puzzle. I do like to hear commentary when I go to art museums. I don't often, but I do. That was an interesting thing about going to the Czech Republic, because you can't speak the language. So you would wear headsets in a museum just to hear what they were saying about whatever piece you're looking at. So it's not that I don't see why people love this movie or why this movie is affecting people. I just personally was emotionally detached from it, and I couldn't figure out why. I somewhat wonder if it's because of the subject matter and like maybe keeping myself emotionally disconnected to keep myself safe from it. I'm not sure. So to backtrack it, I just saw it recently. Did I think about it? Yes, but almost in a, hey, I've got to think about it for the podcast type of situation.
Yeah.
Or, well, I'm not quite sure what was that and why did that happen? And, ooh, that transition, ooh, and that tone, and ooh, that character did this. And I know what I was thinking and feeling, but I'm not sure it all was placed where it needed to be for me to get what I think Corbet wants us to get from it. But that said, as an artist myself, what you take from it is what you take from it. So I'm not saying anything bad about the film. I'm just saying that I'm not sure if I'm in tune to what this movie was about. And that's why I'm glad that you're enthused about it, because I want to learn what you thought. I did think about it, but not like, there are some films where it just will not let you go. It just will not let you go, and you constantly think about it. And then there's some films when you remember about it or you're thinking about it, all of a sudden you're back in the film and you're like, oh. And sometimes you have to stop yourself because it can be, depending on what the film it is, can be devastating. That said, let me comment really quick on the length of the film and the intermission. I'm used to intermissions. Before you were born, there were intermissions. So yeah, I'm okay with that. I thought it was a nice respite. I thought it was nice how everybody just kind of accepted it. I guess people knew going into it. I forgot about it until it happened. And I forgot about the length of the film. The thing that I'm curious about lengths of film nowadays is some people think 3.5 hours is too long, and some people think 3:15 was fine with Oppenheimer, but too long with Killers of the Flower Moon. I did it again. But I go back to Drive My Car. That film is almost 4 hours long, and not for a split second did I lose anything but what was going on when I was watching it. And I constantly think about that movie. And I was just talking about that film with a guy at work, and I don't know this guy other than working with him. I know some of his opinions about stuff, but I know that he likes what he likes, and he's very serious about what he likes. And he has a very poignant point of view of why he likes stuff. And I said the same thing I just said to you about The Brutalist. He goes, did the length bother you? I go, no, I love Drive My Car. Have you ever seen that film? And he just dropped his head and he goes, I love that movie. And I was like, yeah, I do too. And then I made a joke about an actor reading lines in a car. I mean, how could it not be up my alley? So length of movie is never an issue to me. This film, I came out of it thinking to myself, did we need 3.5 hours of it? Could he have condensed it in a way to where it didn't have to feel all 3.5 hours of that movie? But every time I think something like that, I kept thinking, well, maybe that's the reason why it was 3.5 hours. So we would feel the drudgery. We would feel the overbearingness of the film and the subject matter, and how this poor guy just wants to survive and create. And every single human being he comes in contact with, including his wife on some level, all want to do something damaging to him or do something damaging to him, which are usually lies and sexual abuse. So that might be why the director needed it to be as drawn out as it was. I did not feel that the first time I saw the film. I thought that later on.
Wow. So the patron, who's played by Guy Pearce, Harrison Van Buren, he has a line in the film. It's the combination of his line and Toth's reaction. It's dreams slip away. He's like, hey, I need to write this down. I need you to write this down. I need you to come in here. I need you to write this down. I had some ideas for the building, for this center that we're building. I need you to write this down because dreams slip away. And then Toth says, I know. And it's such a very quick kind of like, oh, I get it. I know what he's saying. Dreams slip away. His dreams slip away. But to me, that's what I got out of the film. It's like kind of the distillation of the film. It's like we're following this guy and his family, and we're seeing multiple times where he has his dream, and then by external forces, his dream is taken away from him, or his dreams slip away over and over again, and he gets more opportunity, and then they slip away, and then more opportunity, and then they slip away, and then he gets and he just keeps. It's that cycle of hope, activity, and then dashed dreams. And then back to the hope, activity, and dash dreams. And you can't look at that story and not draw a specific correlation to filmmakers, and especially filmmakers like Brady Corbet, who are doing independent films, getting their own financing, getting things together. Something comes up, they can't do it. And then they got to revise it. And then they got to move back and forth. And he's not necessarily plugged into the Hollywood system, although he was an actor, and he wasn't, he was in Michael Haneke's remake of Funny Games. So he's been in a lot of movies. He was in some really big movies and some smaller movies. So, as an actor, so he's been through it. He's been through the process as an actor, and then he's parlayed that into his career as a filmmaker. But you can imagine that not just in architecture, not just in filmmaking, but in any artistic endeavor, there's probably multiple instances of this happening, getting your hopes up and then getting them dashed, and then back and forth and back and forth. But nowhere during that journey, nowhere during that time is he ever forgetting or losing all hope for the next time when he will have an opportunity. Even when in this film he's shoveling coal and helping Gordon to whatever they were doing, painting a bridge or something. I don't know what they were doing. Even when he's doing all of these menial jobs or physical labor, he's still designing a bowling alley. He never stopped doing his trade. He just lowered his expectations or lowered his sights to something that was more achievable at that moment. Those are the correlations that I saw, and probably why Brady Corbet has spent a bunch of time, whatever it is, 7 years, making this movie, trying to get it made, and has had to back up and start again and back up and start again. And now he has something to show for it. There's other parallels that you can make there too. Obviously he makes, it's a bit on the nose. Yes, it's brutalist architecture, but also you're right. In his life, there are characters, there are people he runs into who are brutal people. And Harrison is one of them. It's one of those where he's a brutal person, but he's also the resource that is made available to Toth, Adrian Brody's character, to be able to do his trade, to be able to create. Because much like filmmaking, an architect can draw as many drawings as they want, but until it becomes a reality, until they get people to pour that concrete and sink those stones and to generate the physical building that he's designed on that piece of paper, it's nothing. it's a concept as opposed to a reality. So those are the things that I kind of pulled away, especially after watching it the second time. And for me, as far as the length was concerned, I never really thought about reducing the length, because it is kind of like two movies where you have the part one and part two, and the intermission is in between. And really part one, I sat there and I had already, got back to my seat, and I was kind of looking, and I looked at my Letterboxd for this movie, and I was like, I don't know. I might just like take a half a star off of this, because I just didn't, like, I was engaged, but I was just like, I felt like it was lacking something. And then after watching the second part again, it blooms, it grows so much more. It gets way more complex. There's the concept of the patron, of Harrison Van Buren, and then there's the reality of the patron. The concept of the patron is in the first half of the movie. It's like, I really liked that library that you designed for me. And even though I didn't say I liked it initially, and I was kind of ticked off, I was going through a lot of stuff, but now that I appreciate it, I want to give you all of this money and everything's going to be great. And we want to make sure that we follow your vision, and, we will default to you. That's the concept of a patron. But the reality of a patron is like, well, we have many masters to serve. So you got to add this, you got to take this away. I understand you got a vision, but here's the reality of the thing. And so it's the concept of artistry versus the reality of artistry. It gets a lot messier in the second half in multiple ways.
Well, I'm impressed, because that helps, really legit helps me with this film. And I was going to say I'm ashamed of myself, but that's not the right thing. I'm a little embarrassed, because you would think as an artist, I would have figured all that out. But now that you just articulated it, I was like, well, there's nothing in what he just said analyzing this film that I can't relate to. I've been in almost every one of those situations, maybe not on as high of a professional level, definitely on as low as a professional level, that's for sure. And, a buddy of mine once said to me, there's nothing wrong with being creative and making it your hobby versus your life. And that kind of freed me up to not worry about ever making it as an actor or making money as an actor, which never really was a road I was on for too long. So I can't really say I really even tried per se, but the fact that it can just be a hobby and it can be what enriches your life. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to pay your bills, but as long as you're loving it for exactly why you love it, then it doesn't matter what it is per se. And then what you just said about the patron. Yes, the patron's great. Here's the money. But, oh, wait, we have this person. We have this person. I totally can relate to that on so many levels, especially as jumping into this directing chair. Co-directing, there's the word compromise, which is not anything anybody would ever describe me as, because I see things and I just it has to be that here. But there are a whole lot of other reasons why, one, it can't be, and two, compromise is a good thing. Compromise means that you're listening to somebody else, and that regardless of whether or not you think your idea is the best idea, compromising means that that person thinks their idea is too. So every once in a while, it's okay. As long as the idea works, it doesn't really matter whose it was. But yeah, that actually helps me a lot. But let me ask you this. If you had not seen it a second time, would you be having the same discussion? Because you just said you thought maybe you'd take a little bit of a half a star away, and that you sort of described how I was saying I felt about it at the beginning of the podcast, where you're kind of separated from it. You were getting all of it, but it wasn't really connecting. But watching the second part a second time made you realize something.
Well, no, for me, I'll just clarify. I watched it once, made my rating or whatever, I think I gave it 4 stars out of 5. And then after watching the first half a second time, I'm like, really, what's happened? Obviously he's had a horrible chunk of life during the Holocaust and in a concentration camp. And when we see him, he's out of there and is arriving to New York and arriving to the United States. But ultimately, during the time of that first part of the movie, I'm kind of like, I don't know. It just seemed like it wasn't dynamic. And I was like, I thought this movie was more dynamic. And then of course the second half of the movie happens and you're like, oh, look, it's dynamic. It's dynamic. You know, there's so much dynamism in that film on a character level, on a filmmaking level, on an image level. The score really ramps up in the second half. And so it is an enhancement of the movie, the second half, and which totally makes sense. You're kind of like setting up the film and then you're really paying off the film, and it coincides with his wife showing up. So yeah, that's another huge part of it. She's in the first part of the film, but only by letters. So in the second part, it gets way
brutal.
Well, yeah, it gets way more brutal for multiple reasons. Yeah, but
well, let me just stop for a split second since you mentioned the beginning of the film. The opening of the film is spectacular. I have never seen a film, and hyperbole, but I have never seen a film where I knew where it was going, didn't want it to go where it was going, and then it completely blew my mind that it was not where it was going at all. And it was something completely different. And until you see the upside down camera shot, you don't have a clue. And then there's a relief that it isn't going where it was going. But then I was a little bit like, oh, that's really manipulative on the best level, because I felt all of those emotions and you didn't have to take me there. We didn't have to see him in the concentration camps. We didn't have to see any of the Holocaust. We felt it in the first, 3 minutes of that opening, where we got everything we needed to get. And then it turned literally. And I was like, okay, that's really well done. Very well done. I just did not, and maybe on a second visit, and I don't know if I would have ever thought about visiting it again, unless it just happened to be somebody hadn't seen it or it was on. Let's see if it wins Best Picture. I'll watch it again just because sometimes I do that. I watch the Oscar winners again just to see it from a different point of view. So now I'm interested in seeing it a second time to feel those kind of things that you were talking about. That said, I still wonder, maybe it's not the length of the film that needs to be shortened. It's not that it needs to be shortened. I just don't know if we needed that length to tell the story. I don't know.
What maybe about Phantom Thread? Is that movie too long?
I've watched that movie like 3 or 4 times. No, not at all.
Okay.
No, not at all. Well, how long is it? 245? 310? Something like that.
I mean,
right?
Yeah, it's pretty long. All of his movies are long. It's 210 actually.
I was going to say, I don't remember it being that.
Dang.
210 minutes or 2 hours?
No, 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Yeah, I didn't think it was that long.
Yeah.
Magnolia is much longer.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I knew that, and I knew that, like, Punch Drunk Love was short, but it seems like a similar like artistry thing, obsessive, and I don't feel like there's any fat on that movie, even though it's slow. I mean, compared to The Fall Guy, but it's one of those movies that, I mean, yeah, I could watch almost at any time, I think, but that's Paul Thomas Anderson.
And maybe that's it. Maybe the precision in the way that Paul Thomas Anderson made Phantom Thread, maybe the precision reminds me of the precision of a designer, and how the seamstress has to do certain things and sew in a certain way and cut in a certain way. Maybe that precision transposed into the film and how he told the story. And maybe in this movie, The Brutalist, it does the same thing, but we're talking about monumental size architecture, which has no outside beauty unless you really look at whitewashed stone, which I can see how somebody would find that beautiful, and how simple that chair in the library is, and how it's a very specific scene. And I was keyed into it, and I knew what he wanted from us when I was watching that sequence. I understood that obviously the doors to the actual library closed so he could have the bright windows, because he was worried about the reflection onto the books and stuff like that. But when he places that book onto that little stand by that very modern looking Art Deco looking chair, I was like, oh, this is about spatial relationships in your space, where okay, you have all of this space around you, but really this little book stand is what you're going to be focused on. So when he moves it just a little bit, I went, okay, this is about spatial relationships in this library. And this is what this film is going to be about. And it is. So maybe the idea of this architect, and he's fictional, right? That's not a real guy. Okay. No. He's based on a few ideas.
It's an amalgam of certain brutalist architects and just different architects in general.
And if you took me to a guided tour about why this structure was considered a piece of art and explained to me that this angle meant this and this, I could see it. But maybe I just don't get it on first take. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like maybe it's not something that hits me.
There's a lot in it. So because, I mean, for me, at least the hard part about it is that I am not really attracted to brutalist architecture. It's not something that I'm that interested in. I will also not interested in being a seamster. I don't know what you call them. Being somebody who designs clothes.
Designer?
A designer, a clothes designer.
Yeah.
But I was engaged in Phantom Thread. I was also engaged in this film, even though I wasn't like, ooh, man, I want that to look like my living room, or I want that to look like, the place that I go worship. But ultimately what it came down to is his reverence for spaces translated on screen because of how it was shot. And so that helped me to understand that, like, yes, I don't need to necessarily be a fan of the architecture, like, as far as like the old library version that they started with versus the new library. I think you're right. It's about that space, and it's about the focus of that space, and it's about how the space around you affects you.
Yeah.
And that's the key. It wasn't an inviting space before because there was no natural light, and it just wasn't inviting, whereas it is now inviting as far as he's concerned. And so that, I think, was the part to key in on, and also in moving forward when designing this, center for community, which to me, like, it did not look like a place that you would necessarily want kids running around with, like a bunch of angles and I mean, I don't know. It just seems
looks like the insane asylum at the top of the hill that everybody avoids, and they make major highways go around it so nobody has to look at it.
Yeah, it did seem a bit difficult.
What's interesting about that is the trick, for lack of a better term, with the flashlight and the cross, and how at noontime the light. So that, to key on one element of beauty amongst all of this stone, is what made it beautiful to me, because he holds out for that shot for a long time. You never see it with the flashlight. You don't see it for a long time.
It's the very end.
Yeah.
It's when Harrison runs away.
Yeah. And it's not exactly noontime because the cross is just a little bit further off that stone. So I thought that was interesting. Now, what you were saying about you're not a seamstress or designer or whatever, but I don't think that has to be. Obviously, you like Paul Thomas Anderson, and whatever subject matters are, he tells an intellectual, stimulating story that engages a person. So it doesn't matter whether or not you understand what design means or what the whatever, off the shoulders, blah, 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 blah. I don't know anything about any of that stuff, but I'm fascinated by people who can create stuff like that. But you go back to sports movies. I'm not a sport. I was going to say sporty again, but I didn't. I told somebody that the other day and they laughed. But that's what
not a big sports fan.
Yeah, I'm not a big sports fan. I'm not a sporty. And I don't want it to be an insult, so I'll stop. But when I see a film about football or about basketball or about whatever, even documentaries, I'm interested in it because it's engaging as a character study. It's engaging as a subject. And now that you've told me those things of how you saw this film, I can see myself already engaging in it in my mind in a different way, because I got all the stuff that we've already talked about. I just was separated from it, and it couldn't. It's, a lot of the sports films, you can find a personal relationship with it, because I'm never going to be a boxer, but the idea of trying for something and thriving for something and even ultimately not achieving it, Rocky, still is about the human spirit and what we're willing to do and what we're willing to sacrifice and what we're willing to put our mind in motion to do. I can relate to all of that. And when you said that thing about him being a filmmaker and how he had to stop and go, and how this architect had to stop and go, and I would say forced stopped many times,
Sure.
By other brutal human beings who just, then I understand this film differently now just by you saying that. I go, yeah, because now I can personalize that. I can say, oh, that's happened to me here, 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 and here in my life, and this is what I did or didn't do to overcome it, or I'm still working on it, so forth and so on. So I appreciate that.
So I wanted to get to a couple of things you talked about earlier. You said that his wife was kind of like against him, or did things to antagonize him. Did you?
No, I don't think she did things to antagonize him, but isn't there like what is it when she, I can't think of it specifically. I can't remember what it is.
Well, for me, there was definitely a lot of deeply ingrained love there between the two that got them both through what hopefully was the worst parts of their lives in the Holocaust, when they were each in separate concentration camps. And the fact that she stuck up for his niece and had to go through more brutal people trying to take advantage of their situation, whether it was, the Russian guards trying to get with, but she stuck with Zofia. And I mean, she converted to Judaism, earlier on in their lives, and she got there with him and stayed with him, and she was essentially trying to make things work. And even when he had issues, she was able to find a job and support the family, or at least assist in supporting the family. And of course, obviously, her very last scene was so impactful for all of the characters. Very well done. I guess we can start getting into spoilers, like really, really deep spoilers. But when she calls out Harrison Van Buren for what he did to her husband, you notice that Toth didn't do that. Adrian Brody's character didn't do that. It was his wife that did that. Probably because he felt like the whole bite the hand that feeds you thing, and she had more respect for her husband and more pride in his work, that she knew that was wrong. And that's what I got out of it, at least, that she was not willing to let that go, even though, like they said in the epilogue, all that happened in whatever it was, 1961, and they didn't even finish that building until 1973.
Right.
So, I mean, obviously a lot of stuff happened between those two times. It was another one of those things where he was willing to try to move past it, but Harrison Van Buren had never been called out like that before. You could tell the look on the other guys in that room, the people that were their guests, and they were just like, well, this doesn't happen. And that's one of the big things that I got from this, is that like people in their echelon, they're able to say whatever they want and do whatever they want and have no consequences. And everybody else has to snap to and, be proper and do what they're told. And that's the kind of key takeaway that I got from that. And then once he's called on his BS, once he's called on his actions, he can't handle it. He just runs away.
Yeah. Well, first of all, welcome to 2025. Second of all, let's go back for just a split second. There is a moment in the film where he wants to go back to work or something, he wants to go back, and she's like, you can't do that. It's not healthy for you, so forth and so on. And she throws something at him about, I've been working. I can't really remember, but she at that moment is not understanding why he needs to go back. So I guess that's the moment I was thinking of.
Yeah, it was so there's a scene where a guy's doing pull-ups on a scaffolding, and he freaks out and he fires the guy. Yeah. And he's firing him because previously 2 guys got injured and that shut down the job. And he's like, if that guy pulls down that scaffold, they're going to shut down the job. So we can't, so we can make, no chances. We have to do just what we're doing here, nothing else. Don't take any risks. And if somebody's taking risks, they're gone. And then he ends up firing Gordon because Gordon's like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, fine, you're gone too. He's just super emotional. He was worried about it getting taken away from him again.
What's that got to do with the wife, though?
Oh,
yeah, I know.
They're in the car, and the wife is essentially saying, like, you can't treat the workers like that. And that, I mean, that's what I got from that scene.
Yeah,
and she was talking about how she was working and how she's, has a job as a writer in New York City
about lipstick and so forth and so on.
She doesn't necessarily like to
right.
Write about lipsticks, and she was writing about foreign affairs and
there's something
Hungary.
that happens before that. I have to obviously see the film again. Okay, so let's go into spoilers and let's talk about what Harrison does, because I'm a little confused about where does it come from. All of a sudden, okay.
I know where it comes from.
Okay.
It's so throughout the whole film, he's being shown up by both Toth and his wife. He gets corrected multiple times by
Harrison?
So Harrison does. Yeah. So ultimately, Harrison Van Buren doesn't have as good of taste as Toth does, and he recognizes that.
Sure.
And he harbors resentment for that. And so what he ends up doing is he's trying to, like, be that patron, be that person, to be like, okay, I couldn't have created this library myself, and I didn't even really recognize how awesome it was until they did a whole story on it. And we're like, look at this amazing library. And who's the guy who did this? And, oh, look what he did back in Hungary. And he's a renowned architect. And he says multiple times in the film when they have discussions, Harrison says to Toth, I find our discussions engaging. So he's trying to extract as much taste and as much artistry from this artist as he can, and even with his interactions with Toth's wife, with Erzsébet, he doesn't he does find that he may not be as smart as she is, which is a whole nother thing. So if he's not as smart as she is, then now that calls into question, like, well, hold on, so now she's a foreigner, she's not American, and she's smarter than me. She's a woman, and she's smarter than me. And I think that really, it scares him. And so he is able to lash out because he can. And so when he's overlooking, when they're in Italy and they've picked out the marble and he's overlooking Toth dancing with this woman, and Toth ends up leaving. The shot is like he's overseeing Toth, and he is just kind of like seeing someone living a life, and he needs to be able to, like, put him in his place, quote unquote. So number one, he sees somebody who's living his life and having fun, even though he's married. But he does leave, actually. So that's a thumbs up for Toth, I guess, at that point.
Go shoot up.
But then he goes and shoots up, and then that whole, like, his whole dialogue, Van Buren's whole dialogue during that scene is directed towards Jewish people and Jewish immigrants to the United States, I guess, but Jewish people in general, of like, why do you do this to yourselves? He's essentially saying, like, you're nothing. I don't know what he says, but he is belittling him verbally, and then of course assaulting him and belittling him physically, as far as, like, I have control over you, even though you don't want me to have control over you. So that's what I got from that scene.
That's brutal. I mean,
yeah,
I now it's going to sound like I'm making a joke, but I'm not making a joke at all. It's brutal. And I've seen some films where I go, okay, that's a really ugly subject matter, but I can wrap my brain around how somebody goes down that path. I just can't wrap my brain around all of everything that you said, I understand perfectly. I understand the justification. I understand that he is not as smart. He's not as creative. This is a foreigner. This is a Jewish man. This is a marginalized person, but yet I have all the power. I'm a Caucasian male with a lot of money in this society that I am on the top of the totem pole of society. But I can't have this. And your wife is even smarter to me. Just so bizarre that the thing that he chooses to do, which is rape him. Yeah. It's such the most drastic measure to showing dominance, but I guess that is what rape is.
Yeah, he's saying I win.
And it's powerful.
Saying,
but what's perplexing to me is
it's not sexual. That's the thing.
Right.
In that scene,
the functionality
of
it is sexual, and the functionality of it. The function of a male body being stimulated by all of what you just said. Is just beyond. It's leaving like a little throw up taste in my mouth. Like it's beyond how I can process something like that.
It goes back to like the Harvey Weinstein. Like, how is it that somebody can be in a situation where they're just being super nasty and creepy, and they can, like you said, be stimulated. It just doesn't make sense, like on an emotional level.
Yeah. So and I don't mean to simplify it to make it any less brutal than that scene is, but it just seems like it comes out of nowhere. And up until you just explained all of that, I got all of that. And I'm thinking now my resistance to this film is a safeguard. I've safeguarded myself from the film because now I'm having an emotional reaction to it, thinking about it and thinking about what that poor man had to go through. He has to fight just to be a creative, and then all of the stuff that he has to go through, literally fighting, physically, spiritually, all of the above. And then to have somebody use a sexual act to prove their worth to themselves is just... mind-boggling.
And if you take that into the entertainment industry or filmmaking specifically, it is that Harvey Weinstein thing. It's like, I do this, you can keep working. I get to do whatever I want, and then you keep working. And then it's just that cycle over and over again. But that's the entry fee to being able to work. And that's not how it has to be, obviously. So in this particular case, Toth had assumed that, or had just tried to deal with it, I guess, to a certain extent. But his wife knew that didn't have to be how it was. So last question about the end of part 2. I've read online, some people think that he may have killed himself. Harrison Van Buren may have killed himself. Did the reaction of the son, Joe Alwyn, Harry, like it got like, especially the second time I watched it, it got super creepy. First of all, that's a single shot. It's a single shot where they drag her out. They drag Toth's wife, Elizabeth, out of the dining room. And then the son is like, okay, he's like, father. And then he transitions at some point, because he goes upstairs, back downstairs. He transitions at some point from father to dad.
Yeah.
And daddy, it was either dad or daddy. And I was like,
I think it's both.
Jeez. Yeah. Just that, like, he's losing
reverting.
It. Yeah,
he's
and also he's
to being a child.
Yeah, and he doesn't know how. Like, and obviously his mom wasn't in the picture for a very long time because his dad was just like, "Nope, you're out of here." There's a whole. We haven't explored the Harrison Van Buren character, and I mean, part of me is kind of like, the movie's not about him. The movie's about what he does to Toth and Toth's family. That's what the movie's about. But just the fact that how he talks about how he essentially got rid of his wife, and he's, it was like it was his mom or his wife, and he picked his mom even after having kids with his wife. And then there was that one scene where he talked about his grandparents, his mom's parents, and him paying them off. And that scene, initially, I totally forgot about that scene the first time I watched the movie, but the second time I watched the movie, that's a really important scene. I mean, it's important for that character. It's you have to prove your worth to me. At least what I got out of the second time. You have to prove your worth to me. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done. It doesn't matter. If you don't meet my standard at that moment, I don't owe you anything. And it essentially was for him, like by giving them a $500 check, it was like him tipping us, one penny.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, you wanted money, you got money, but you're worth exactly that and nothing more. That there could be a whole nother movie about that, I guess. But really, I think this movie is the more interesting movie.
Well, it takes somebody as precise of an actor as Guy Pearce to pull it off. And thus his Oscar nomination, his first of his career. And it is not a character I ever want to have anything to do with other than him be fictional in a movie. But I see aspects of his character in our society, and in particular right now, that ultimately those people never realize that it's not going to work out the way they think it is. They will not win, because ultimately light rises above darkness. It just does. And as cliche and as cheesy as that sounds, it's the 100% truth. And I think the son at the time, who I used to like that actor. Now I'm a little weary.
Joe Alwyn?
Yeah.
Well, we
Alwyn,
just saw him in
right?
Kinds of Kindness too.
Yeah,
Golly, that guy.
I used to like him. Now I'm starting to worry about him because he can really turn. He's not very nice in The Favorite, and he's just, I mean, it's a compliment. I'm making a joke. Yeah. But as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh, he's that guy. I've worked at enough country clubs. I know this guy. And he proved to be that guy, even
and he's
though
the same way with Zofia. Like he's like, no, like she's mine. I want her, so she's mine. Yeah. And then when it like, doesn't work out, it's kind of like, well, okay.
Yeah. Well, she's kind of fascinated with him for a while. So yeah, I don't know if Harrison kills himself. I had this image when I was driving home that he fell into a pit of cement. I don't know why I thought that. I felt like he's embedded into the walls of that.
That's awesome.
I don't know why. It's just something
that would be so cool.
I don't know. I feel strangely better after talking to you about the film, but actually disturbed more, because I do understand this film on a better level. And I sometimes wonder, why would I need an explanation? What didn't I get from the movie? What did the movie not give me? Or what did I not see in the movie that I didn't feel all of that stuff? But it's not that. I got all of that stuff. I just couldn't articulate it. I couldn't tell you why I was feeling distant from this movie. And then we start to talk about it. We start to break it down. We start to, these characters are not likable characters. Even the main character's not. Nobody wants their kid to grow up to be a junkie and, whatever, but he still has integrity. He's still an artist and that kind of stuff. He is the best of this bunch, if you will. But I now understand why. I didn't think the movie was void of emotion. I knew the movie had emotion. I just think I put up a wall very quickly. Yeah. And I don't know, something about the brother. And I was like, don't stay in that room with that wife by yourself ever. Don't do it. Don't do it. I knew that instinctually. Like I just knew it. And I knew that he wasn't going to be able to live in that environment. I didn't know it was going to happen the way that it happened in the film, but I knew he wasn't going to be able to. And that scene, it's a really great scene where they're looking at the chairs in the window. Mm-hmm. And she was like, well, I need to do this and I need to put something in there. And he goes, just leave it. And she's like, what? And he was like, just leave it the way it is. And I'm like, oh, he sees something that we don't see.
That's where, I mean, even the brutalist movement and in this, and Brady Corbet does talk about that too in some of his interviews. He's talking about how specifically the brutalist architecture movement was a forward-looking type of a movement, and it was the antithesis of everything. I mean, what happened before that? The Victorian era? I mean, you got like spindles and things all over the place, and then you go to like slabs with small windows, and but the windows aren't just like put in random places. The windows are strategically put in to allow light in, certain blah blah blah, all this stuff. The reason why amazing artists are amazing artists is because they know something's good before anybody else does. Yeah. And so that's the kind of fun part about it. And you're right. That scene is him knowing that something is good before anybody else does. Yeah. Without being able to explain it, without being able to articulate it, it doesn't matter. Just leave it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they
just
don't
leave
need validation either.
Yeah.
They don't need anybody else to tell them it's good. They're like, no, it's good.
That's interesting.
So that's
interesting.
really cool. And like I said, it doesn't matter what the building looks like. The building was different, and enough people are like, you know what, that does look good, and there you go. That's art. So I mean, Rothko, it's like the guy did a bunch of stuff before he started painting squares of color, but when he started painting squares of color, he was like, looks good to me. Here we go. So and a lot of people loved it. I mean, I don't understand it, but doesn't matter. A lot of people also do. Okay, I want to talk about the epilogue. The epilogue brings in a whole nother wrinkle and like opens up this whole other can of worms. The fact that the design for that civic center in Pennsylvania was essentially a replica of his cells in Buchenwald and the cells of his wife in Dachau in the concentration camps, with the small addition of windows in the ceiling to allow light in, and the connection of those multiple sub-buildings with a tunnel between them to allow for a connection between them. I mean, all of that, I was just kind of like, he didn't say that to anybody, and he didn't even necessarily say that to his wife, but I think that they probably had some sort of connection in the design phase, and she understood what he was going for when she saw the layouts, because I'm sure she told him about what it was like to live in that concentration camp, and he knew what it was like to live in Buchenwald. So being able to like insert that in, and that's why there's multiple scenes that you totally don't even pay attention to the first time. After watching it the second time, they come in with a revision to the drawing where the ceilings aren't as high. They're only 8 meters high instead of 10 meters high. And so he's like, nope, here's what we're going to do. We're going to dig down another 2 meters. So we lose it up here, but we gain it down here. So it doesn't matter when you're inside that room, the height of the ceilings is still the same. That's why it was so important to him, because if they were shorter, it would not have been a replica of what that was. And he wouldn't have been able to enact his vision for this. Now, I'm sure he didn't tell Harrison Van Buren that this is what he was doing, but he did it anyway, and he got it through. So is that just him putting in a little Easter egg for him and his family, or is that a statement? I don't know. Like, I don't know what his motivation. Yeah.
You write what you know, you act what you know, you paint what you know, you play what you know. That's one of the reasons why I'm attracted to some artists that some people don't like. It's not necessarily whether or not they like them or don't like them. I can't explain to them why they hit my ear a certain way, but they are doing their own thing. And their own thing is based on their history and so forth and so on. I mean, I'm going to make a U2 reference here because they're the perfect example. A lot of people think that the Edge is cheating on the guitar by doing the sound effects that he does. I personally think it's quite brilliant that you can make the same sound that these guitar people are making, but feel it differently and make the same sound by doing something simple, because you've learned to program an amp the way that you've learned to program an amp or an echo or whatever it is that you may use. But that all comes from the fact that they kind of joined a band before they even knew how to play instruments. So they were playing band before they were playing instruments. And then eventually along the way, they learned how to play their instruments. So it's all very simple based 3 chords and the truth, because that's where they came from, and they come from the post-punk era. So that's why they have more of a push behind their music than most melodic anthem 80s music has. And they only sound like them. Whether or not you like them or not, they only sound like them. There have been imitations, and there are some people before them that sort of had some similar things, but they only sound like that. And that's what artists do. They bring what they know to the table. So he probably didn't even think twice about it. He probably just went, this has to be 2 meters longer or deeper because of this. And this is why. Did he put the connection together that, he was recreating this thing? Maybe not. He was still thinking he was creating a rec center or a community center. This just happens to be how he was formed. So that's why it was implemented into the community center. It makes perfect sense to me. Perfect sense. It's the same way I was trying to explain to an actor the other night about intentions, about I wants. But that's how I learned. I learned A and B characters are in a scene. A wants something from B wants something from A. That causes the conflict. How they decide to get it from each other is the resolution, but they want something from each other. So you can play an intention. You can't play sadness. You can't play happy. You can't play mad, but you can play an intention. So I want to seduce her in order to get her into bed to make my brother jealous because I got her into bed first. You can play that. Mm-hmm. You can't play, hey, baby, how you doing? You can't play seductive. You can play, I want to seduce. That's one thing. So that's how I know. So that's what I do. And that's what I learned. So that's who I am. So this is who he is.
Yeah, it's true. So the last line in the movie is a quote that Laszlo gave to his niece. And it was, no matter what the others try and sell you, it's the destination, not the journey. So I guess that kind of makes sense in this particular microcosm of his career, because like we were talking about, he started and stopped, and the fact that there's a building there, and he even talked about this before, a lot of the buildings that he designed in Budapest stood up to the bombing, to the Nazi bombing and the Russian bombing and all that during World War II, and the fact that that will be a reminder and a springboard for future revolutions, that kind of a thing. So the fact that he did get this building done, even if it wasn't until 1973, that's the destination. And I guess what he's saying is that all the stuff that happened before that, it's worth it because he has this to show for it. Like, it's literally the opposite of what most people say nowadays. Like, oh, it's not about what you own. It's not about what car you drive, all this stuff. This guy's literally saying, like, it is about the thing that I built.
I can feel that too.
It's
because
like,
I've always been a little bit bothered by that. Like, yeah, the journey's great, but man, when you got that great song, or you got that great moment on stage, or you got that great clip in the film, you got those 60 seconds on film. Yeah, the journey is interesting, and you can tell those stories for the rest of your life. But that moment right there is whether or not the journey was worth it on some level. So. And I'm so glad. I'm so happy it's the opposite.
Well, you know what's funny though is that not a lot of people may have the benefit of having that end product, whether it be a building or whether it be a film. I mean, you can always go back to the film. Brady Corbet can 20 years from now, hopefully, watch this movie and be like, "Yep, nailed it." Or he could also be like, "Oh my God, this was so horrible." Even I don't think he thinks that, but same kind of a thing. You know, you can always drive by a building or walk into a building that you built and say like, "Nope, this is it." So whereas a lot of, especially nowadays, a lot of the things that people do to make money are transitive. They don't exist for more than a certain amount of time. To a certain extent, what I do is that way. You know, the 6 p.m. news today had never happened before and will never happen again. And it also will not mean as much as it did at 6 p.m. today. I get worth out of that. I get satisfaction out of that, making that happen. But at the same time, yeah, it's not something that I can hold in my hand. You know, I guess I can rewatch the 6 p.m. from today, but
yeah,
it's
that's
a little bit
interesting
different.
Because being on stage is gone in a split second, but I still know what I felt, and I still know what people said to me, and I still know how I saw people react afterwards. And I just met somebody the other night who saw me in something, and I was like, be on your best behavior until you find out what they thought. No, not really, but sort of. Luckily, it was good what he had to say, but so it's always there. I mean, it might not be a painting, it might not be a TV show, it might not be, a piece of music, but it's always there, and it grows. It grows and you get perspective of it, and you understand what you were going through during the moment. Not necessarily on stage, but before, during, and after, how that is all important. But that moment that you had on stage that you can still feel really is something that sticks with you the rest of your life. At least it does for me. And the ones that I grapple with to this day are the ones that I know I didn't get right. So I'm always constantly doing it in my brain. That has subsided a lot later on in my life, but there are a few that still I'm obsessed with. to the point where I'll start spewing the monologue or whatever the line is and be like, oh, that was good. Why didn't that come up back then 25 years ago?
Jeez.
Yeah, what are you going to do? Oh, real quick. I just want to tap really quick. I know it's the very last couple seconds, but we never talked about the performances. You mentioned the performances. I halfway through the film, going into halfway through the second part, I had this very quick thought about how Felicity Jones was on the edge of getting a nomination, but a lot of people thought she wouldn't. And after I saw the film, I was like, how is that even debatable? Like, how is it even debatable? She's not going to be an Oscar nominee. And she is. Yeah. And so is Adrian Brody. He's up for his second Academy Award, and Guy Pearce, and then it's nominated for 10 other ones, including director, best picture. And I believe if it's the movie that sweeps, if it's the movie that takes director, picture, Adrian Brody wins his second Oscar, let's get Felicity Jones in there. Why not? That supporting actress Oscar is sort of a little up for debate. I'm not so sure.
Wasn't she nominated before for like Theory of Everything?
Yeah. Okay. This is her second nomination.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of things in between that she could have been nominated for.
She's great. I mean,
she is great. She is great.
Awesome.
The accent's great. The strength of the character's great. The vulnerability of the character's great. She's just a force of nature on film. So I'm happy for all of them, and the performances are stunning. I just thought we should be a little bit more specific and tap into it, even though it's the end of the podcast.
And he also has like a stable of actors with Raffi Cassidy. We talked about her when we talked about Vox Lux.
And the Killing of the Sacred Deer.
And Killing of a Sacred Deer, yeah, man. And then Stacey Martin has also worked with Brady Corbet, and he co-wrote this film with his wife, and she co-produced it. And then he obviously directed it. And then the Gordon character is played by Isaac de Bencoul, French actor. I saw him in Casino Royale for the first time, and he's great in that. He's one of the bad guys in Casino Royale, and I mean he's awesome. I've seen him a few times, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the performances were amazing. I mean, all of it. The cinematography was great. Shooting on film with old cameras, and I mean, it's like I said before, they're putting a lot of stumbling blocks in front of them, and they're just very nicely jumping over them and saying like, no, this is important. That it's that whole thing. It's like, wouldn't it be easier if you shot digital? Nope. No, we want to make it look like this. We want to make it, look like this using technology that was developed and used in this short period of time during the film. And it's like only movies that were made between 1954 and 1961, those are the only movies that were made in VistaVision as feature-length films. Now, this is an exception. Also, Paul Thomas Anderson's new film with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, that was also shot in VistaVision. So multiple reasons why we get into, but it's pretty cool that they decided to dig into that and to really commit to film. I think all of his movies have been shot on film, but this is the first one in a long time that's been shot on essentially a dead technology, or a technology that was replaced by other technologies. So a lot of respect for that. So okay, if you want to check us out on the web, you can go to actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. We're on X @actorengineer, and we're on YouTube. Just search for the Actor and the Engineer podcast. We'll see you next time.